Hi, this is Roger, and today we're going to be looking at the prologue to the 1913 Armory show. Now, as we're going through the Armory story, I'd like you to consider a few things. Number one would be, what is your response as you're looking at the artwork today? Second would be, what do you think you would be thinking if you were present in 1913 and looking at the show? And third, what if you were there in 1913, but you were not the prototypical target audience? So you were non-white, non-heterosexual, and you were not a male. The show, of course, was put together by white, heterosexual males. So as a result, you're taking a second look as if you were not the people putting on the show. The show took place at the 69th Regiment National Guard Armory in New York City. They created 18 booths using burlap walls and adorning the place with pine trees, which they took as a symbol to mean liberty. The layout included the blue areas that you see, which were for American art. The red was for French art. The green was for Irish and English. And the gold was for Dutch, Swiss, and American. So why have the show? Well, the goal behind having the show was to promote modern art and make that American modern art. Ideally, they wanted to draw attention to what was being done by American artists. Now, along those lines, they assembled 1,300 works by 300 artists. They had nearly 300,000 visitors over the course of the show, and the event took place for 4 weeks in New York. Then it moved to Chicago for 3 weeks, where it was mostly the foreign work with a smaller number of American pieces. And then it moved on to Boston to the Copley Society, where it was smaller again, but mostly foreign works. Now, the idea behind this came from visiting the London Grafton show in 1910 and then again in 1912, as well as a big show that took place in Cologne. Certain Americans were having success in Europe, such as Max Weber and Morgan Russell, but they weren't seeing the same success in the United States. The same thing held for Arthur Davies, Walt Kuhn, William Glackens, who we know, and others. They were not seeing the success that they would like. So they got together and decided to hold this event. So take a second and see if you can identify which of these is the Matisse, which is the Van Gogh, which is the Brancucci, and which one would be by John Sloan. Now, if the idea of getting together to draw attention sounds familiar, we were discussing it just a few weeks ago when we had our Zoom session about the Impressionist show and about the Salon. So Monet, of course, came to light as the Impressionists launched. And then we had Salon de Independence, Salon de Autumn, which is where Matisse and the Fauves stuck out. The Eight had their show in 1908. And then, as I referenced, there were two shows at the Grafton Gallery and the Soderbund in Cologne. And at these different events, that is how Kandinsky came to the fore, Gauguin became prominent, and of course Cézanne surfaced, particularly at the Salon de Independence. Well, the event that was in London in 1910 was a big deal. It was organized around Manet, and then they filled in around him with Cézanne, Gauguin, Van Gogh, and Matisse. That show was extended in 1912 with more Russian art and also a lot more post-impressionist work. Okay, its sister show that was going on by a totally different organization in Cologne was the Soderbund show. And if you take a look at the graphic on the right, you can see the Munch lithograph in the upper corner And then they were promoting quite a lot of Van Gogh and quite a bit of Kirchner, who you see in the image down below. So a question came up while I was looking at this as how do you borrow that amount of artwork? And it turns out that Walt Kuhn, Walt Pak, and Arthur Davies were the ones that assembled the European artwork. And Kuhn found his way to The Hague, which is where he decided upon the idea to make a major play in Odeon Redon work, which we'll spend more time on next week. And then he visited Berlin. He visited the Cologne show as it was wrapping up, and also found his way to multiple other cities in Europe collecting art. He then met up with Davies, Kuhn, and Pak, the three of them, in Paris, and there they were able to see a number of the artists themselves, including the Duchamp, Villon Duchamp brothers, as well as they met with Brancusi, and they also had a chance to meet with the major dealers such as Bernard June, Druitt, and Vollard. And then while they were wrapping things up there, Davies and Pak found their way to London. They caught the end of the Grafton show, and there they decided they were going to make a major play on Matisse, and notified Kuhn to assemble more Matisses. And then they found their way back to the U.S., where William Glackens had been assembling the American art. How did this all come together? And how did it, what kind of press did it receive? Well, it shocked the press. As you can see here in front of you, that is a real in-your-face Matisse that you see. That is the blue nude staring out at you. And then on the right, you have Mustard Pot and Woman from Picasso, which, as you would expect, drew a lot of attention. And then you have Gauguin with the sculpture that he created of a head as a vase, and also the nude descending the stairs, which we'll be talking a lot more about. Here are a couple of clips from what the press had to say. If you look at the piece on the right, it says, "Curing the insane with art." If you look above, it's a show that clamors. Insurgent exhibition in New York. Cubists depart. Students are joyful. In the Armory show art battle. The graphic in the middle is at the Art Institute of Chicago, and it had a marching band, and they had just burnt who they called Harry Matisse, Henry Matisse, in effigy, and then they painted some Cubist works of their own and then burnt them as part of the burning in effigy statement also. A couple of other fun facts as we get ready for the show. Edith Dimmock, who we know is William Glackens' wife, participated. She had 8 different really adorable gouache charcoal watercolors, this one being the Sweatshop Girls going out in the country. It's quite cute. And then there was quite a surprise. The New York show drew 87,000 people. The Chicago show doubled that, and we'll talk more about that, but it's quite something. There was a tremendous amount of advance press for the Chicago show, most of it negative, of course. They had previews 3 and 4 days before the event, and that helped drive a massive turnout for the event. And then the Boston show was much smaller in the number of works and also participation. Another tidbit is that luxury goods that were under 20 years old had a very high tax. So the way to get around it, the sculptures that were coming in were categorized in some cases as being industrial supplies. And that way they were not subject to the 15% tax. And one odd piece that came up is that Arthur Davies is rumored to have been managing 2 families, one where he was known as Arthur Davies and another as David Owen. Now, since we're in Fort Lauderdale, of course, we're going to talk a little more about Glackens. And the piece on the left is a family group from 1911. It has a little bit of that feel of a Renoir. family portrait. Just a few years earlier, in 1907, 1908, the Metropolitan Museum in New York had just placed their Georges Charpentier and family Renoir portrait, in which case Glackens may have been inspired by that piece. In this work, you have Edith standing in the greenish dress, more casual, Ira next to her. On the far right is a family friend, and on the left is her sister-in-law. The bathing hour on the right is a atypical Glackens, and that you can see has very high key coloring. It is absolutely channeling some of the Derain and Matisse type of coloring, and pretty spectacular actually. And that is from 1910, 1911, and very, very vibrant piece. So a few things to consider as we get ready to move on. Were the Americans smart to have this show? Why do you think Chicago was so big? We touched on that a little. The nude descending the stairs was rejected just the year before in Paris, yet it was the cause célèbre here. Why do you think? Was the nude cubist or was it futurist? And I know for some of you that's a trick question because we haven't talked about futurism yet, but we will. And Matisse was the rave of Europe, but they burned him in effigy at the Art Institute of Chicago. We'll talk more about that. I'll be curious to see your thoughts. And how do you think the American artist sales fared after they put on this big event? In closing, here are a couple of works that will not be in the module but are worth pointing out. Stuart Davis, he was admitted through the jury system by Glackens. John Sloan. The former revolutionaries, of course, were not revolutionary any longer. Monet and Renoir. The Fauves, if you remember our discussion during the Zoom session, I was referencing how they kept pushing the envelope, in which case you now see unrealistic coloration in the Georges Braque and the pointillism in Seurat's piece, which in the background you can see Le Grand Jatte from the Art Institute of Chicago. A couple of peaceful pieces to look at. Twachtman, an American artist with a lot of influence, and a very cute Brancucci, Mademoiselle Pogonnet. Next time, a lot more on Gauguin and a lot more on Cubism.